All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, and I want to welcome you to Contested Politics, preparing for November 3rd and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Terry Smith, and I will be co-moderating this discussion with Jonathan Likes. I want to take a second to give a huge thank you to Selena Flowers and Rory Burton for providing ASL interpretation for us this evening. So before we get started, I always like to say a little bit about who we are and the type of space that we've envisioned for the webinar. So the Data Liberation Project is a collaboration of the efforts of GenForward and Black Youth Project. In short, GenForward is a first of its kind survey of 18 to 36-year-olds that focuses on issues of importance to African American, Latinx, and Asian American young adults. The Black Youth Project is a digital platform meant to amplify the voices of young Black people and is especially interested in understanding what new factors help to shape or contribute to the social and political attitudes and behaviors of African American youth. So we've merged these two to create what we've been calling the Data Liberation Project, and we host webinars every other month. And the ultimate purpose of the project is twofold. First, we hope to prevent data from being siloed within the academy. Secondly, and most importantly, we hope that this project will sort of encourage and further the use of data as a liberating tool for marginalized folks. So to achieve these goals, we want to think with and among activists and organizers and all who are invested in the liberation of marginalized people. We launched this project in June, and we held our first webinar where we discussed what we called COVID capitalism, which ultimately was a discussion about the vulnerabilities of capitalism and the radical possibilities that emerged in the context of movement work. So let me just set the stage for this webinar and say a bit about what we want to do here, and then we can get to know our panelists. So ultimately, this is a discussion about the election, but what we hope to do in this space is to think sort of above and beyond the question of whether or not folks should vote. What we hope to do instead is to illuminate the importance of engaging with electoral politics and talk about how Black, Latinx, and Asian American millennials are engaging in political action outside of voting, and also to think more clearly about the radical futures that we're envisioning. We hope that this discussion sort of sparks a larger conversation about the importance of organizing and movement work. So we brought together this group of organizers and activists to think about the bounds of electoral politics, the strengths of movement work, and how to set our sights beyond November 3rd. So with all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jonathan to introduce himself and our panelists, and then we can go ahead and dive in.
Hey everyone, so excited to be here as we're living in a wild, wild world, 14 days away from the election. What more appropriate conversation to have than contested politics? I'm Jonathan Likes. I'm the Director of Programming and Partnerships for GenForward and Black Youth Project. So let's dig in, and I'm so excited to introduce our three panelists today. First, I would like to introduce Jen Jackson. So excited to have them on. Jen is a queer, androgynous Black woman, lover of all Black people, organizer, and assistant professor at Syracuse University in the Department of Political Science. Jackson's research is in Black politics with a focus on group threat, gender and sexuality, political behavior, and social movements. Jackson is a columnist for Teen Vogue, the author of peer-reviewed articles at Public Culture, Politics, Groups, and Identities, and Journal of Women, Politics, and Policy, and the author of several forthcoming books in book chapters on the intersection of race, gender, class, and politics. Jackson's first academic book project investigates the role of group threat in influencing Black Americans' political behavior. They find that Black women are most likely to express concerns about state-based and intergroup threat. Comparatively, Black men vary drastically in their response to group threat depending on their sexual orientation, gender expression, and vulnerability to stereotypes. Jackson received their doctoral degree from the Department of Political Science at the University of Chicago, where they also received a graduate certificate in gender and sexuality studies. Jen earned a BS in industrial engineering from the University of Southern California with a minor in sociology. They later went on to earn an MA with honors in political science from California State University, Fullerton, where they taught political science research methods, and Black politics. So excited to have you on, Jen, and congratulations on the most recent book contract. Whoop,
I was
whoop.
like, I did not realize it was that long. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have
You,
done
we,
short.
hey, the people deserve to hear where you have been and what you have done, okay? So moving on now, I'm super excited to introduce Francella Chiden Chinchilla. Francella is an expert in advocacy strategy and coalition building for progressive caucuses and issues affecting people of color. For almost a decade at the Rabin Group, she served her nonprofit clients with strategic planning and execution of high-level decision-making for long-term campaigns. She served as the lead for the Washington representative for a large membership organizations and foundations on issues including immigrant inclusion, health equity, and Latinx political power by representing them on Capitol Hill with the administration and among peer organizations. Francella earned a bachelor's degree in government from Georgetown University and a master's in public policy from the University of Southern California. She served as board chair for the Esperanza Education Fund, a status blind mentorship and scholarship organization for immigrants in DC. She currently lives in Los Angeles with her husband and baby girl. Thank you, Francella, for being here. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Laura Lee, the campaign manager. She joined the team. She joined the team in June 2017 and brings 10 years of experience organizing Asian Americans on immigrant and refugee rights through the racial justice lens. She's a community organizer and a digital campaigner based in Washington, D.C. area. Prior to 18MR, she was a campaign consultant for the Proteus Fund and a recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship, where she was based in Brazil. She taught race and US politics in English at the Universidade Federal do Paraná, and conducted a community research project on racial identity in Asian diaspora in Brazil. Laura is also a daughter of a Chinese immigrant restaurant worker, the first in her family to attend college, and is building a world that values and affirms all of our experiences. Her organizing philosophy is based in empowerment through forming a knowing self and community identity. Locally, Laura is a member of the Asian Pacific Islander Resistance, a multi-ethnic, multiracial collective, a radical left Asians and Pacific Islanders engaging in organizing, healing, art, community building, everything that I love. She holds a BA from Oberlin College in politics. Thanks so much for all of our panelists for being here. We are excited to dig in. Terry, back to you.
All right, so just a quick little note on how things will go or how we hope they'll go. We have some questions prepared that we like to discuss with the panelists. Then we'll take a minute to look at some GenForward data. That should be really quick, and sort of discuss its implications. And then we'll take some questions from the viewers. So feel free to send in your questions as they come to you. In order to do so, just put them in the chat box wherever you're watching, here on Zoom, Facebook, Twitter, wherever. And we'll have those queued and ready to go for the end. So before we get started, I just kind of want to do a quick check-in. We're what, like 2 weeks or something like that out from election day. So like, how are y'all feeling? Like, how are y'all doing? How are you personally getting ready, and how are you practicing self-care in this moment?
Are we feeling? Or are we just pushing our feelings of existential dread deep, deep?
Yeah, more like that.
I feel that. I feel that 100%.
Yeah, I will be real and say I recently started rewatching Gossip Girl from the very beginning on Netflix. And that is one way that I just like turn my brain off at night for a little bit and plunge into some ridiculousness.
So mine is Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone. That's what I'm getting into.
Ah.
I'm just like, oh, this is weird, but also life is weird. So this is okay. So yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Are you enjoying that? I haven't watched it yet.
So the thing is, I love horror. Like, I'm obsessed with horror in any form. It can be bad, it can be good. It doesn't really matter to me. But growing up, I used to watch the Twilight Zone series with my mom. And I think he's actually doing a good job of like doing justice to the original. I know that some folks don't feel like it's, quite close enough to the original, but I mean, I think it works for me because I don't care that much. I'm also not like a student of horror, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that if you were someone who was like really into the series and you like remember episodes and you know how the story arc, yeah, you might be a little disappointed. But if you're me and you really like horror, you're gonna have a great time.
Fair enough. I might have to check it out then.
I'm so happy that we could open this panel on something that has nothing to do with politics, just how we're taking care of our bodies, our spirits, our minds. Because at the end of the day, if we can't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to be political. We're not going to be able to fight back. We're not going to be able to build this resistance movement that we are all a part of. So appreciate you all opening up with such grace. So we would love to give you all a chance to talk a bit about your organization and the work that you're doing. So we can go in reverse order to how we started. So whoever wants to jump in, just say the work that you're building in this time.
I can go first. Okay, so I am the campaign manager at 18 Million Rising, or 18MR for short, and it's a digital first and member driven organizing hub for progressive Asian Americans. Our members are 18 to 35, or as y'all put it, 18 to 36. I guess if you just age out of 35, Asian Americans and allies or co-conspirators. And our members really deeply care about their communities and invest in them year round. And I say that because I think a lot of times folks just think about Asian Americans as like a slice of the electorate every 2 years, and like political parties, other bodies don't really pay attention to us unless it's like to court our votes or, you know, try to push things in their favor. And we run campaigns that center like Asian American needs, and that's because the state often like fails us or targets us. And so one example of a campaign we're doing right now is demanding that the county attorney for Henrico County in Virginia drop these arrest charges for Southeast Asian, Black, and trans community leaders who were arrested or have arrest warrants out for them because they were protesting ICE Director Tony Pham at his house to like hold him accountable for all of the human rights abuses that are happening, that, you know, are just multitudes and have spanned for years, but like recently a lot of horrific news has come out. And the other thing that we've been working on recently is just raising money to pay people's bail, to free them from cages, and then support like Asian and Black-led grassroots fundraising in particular. We just finished a fundraising drive where we raised like $10K for Freedom Inc., TKO Society, and for us. So those are some of the things we're working on right now.
I can go next. That's awesome, Laura, especially that ICE work. That's so key. At Eki's Labs, I am Francella, and I started as Vice President of Partnerships this year because we are a digital innovation and research hub that seeks to understand the Latinx electorate, but I feel the goal of the Data for Liberation, mission so hard because it only works in so much as the people that we need it to work for are actually a part of it, can help inform data and really provide their experience on what they need, us to actually go into the field with. And also we needed more, Latinx people who are actually asking the questions and know how to ask them, and know the nuances of the different communities within the Latinx community. It's very different to be Puerto Rican in Florida or Pennsylvania or New York, and what year did you come even, to the mainland, like all of that can change a lot in terms of how you engage and what your priorities are, et cetera. And so at my role, I'm able to actually work with the groups. That's all I do, is work with the groups in the different states that we care about. We have 11 states that are our priority states, and make sure they both receive the information that we have, but also on the front end, talk to them about, you know, what's going on, what do they need, what are you seeing, what are the local issues, you know, what geographies should we be sure to hit, you know, where you seeing like growing Latinx communities. If we want to do a focus group, you know, should it be with young women, non-college, you know, or who are you worried about, you know, older men, you know, whatever it is. So I get to really work with them and make sure that our data is informed by them. Currently, you know, we actually have only been around for about 1.5 years. And so this is go time. We kind of came together for this moment. Really, this is how I keep feeling. I keep telling myself like, this is it. This is what this is it. You know, we got created 1.5 years waiting for this moment now. And so all I do all day is really field questions from people and make connections for people, and trying to make sure that we give them the guidance that we have. In addition to like data and research, we do message testing, digital ad testing, especially really think about audience targeting and helping people understand, you know, where the Latinx community is, making sure we're of course expanding the electorate all the time, stressing the need to expand the electorate, and finding, you know, more Latinos and talking to Latinos that are usually ignored, you know, so frequently. So spend a lot of time talking to groups about what we know, what we can recommend, you know, what our data shows and our testing shows. You know, and I think we've heard over and over this year from so many people that they wish they had this before. You know, this is so great to have this resource this time around. And here we are, 2020, finally we got it, you know, but wow. You know, we're looking forward. I have a lot of anxiety about 2 weeks from today, but I'm also looking forward because I see a lot of incredible stuff I've never seen before among our community. So
That's amazing. Yeah, I guess I'm the last person. So I, it's funny, I'm no longer tethered to a formal organization because I have aged out of BYP 100. And so that's heartbreaking for me to say out loud. So most of my organizing has been through direct giving, throughout quarantine. Before quarantine, I was really focused on working with young folks at Syracuse University through the Not Again ASU movement, and engaging with the administration around racial justice on campus. And now I'm really focused on thinking about the ways that women, femme, queer, trans folks have to now navigate this moment, and frequently do not have the resources that they need to do that in ways that help them thrive and survive. So over the summer, I tend to try to just use whatever tools I have at my disposal to do this work. And so I was able to raise about $5,000 over the summer for direct giving to women and femmes who were taking care of children, Black children, who needed support. And so that's kind of like really what I do now is I'm really focused on direct giving and work through the academy, which is where I have the greatest influence now that I'm a professor and now that I'm an assistant professor. So my work is really focused on really interrogating the ways that universities reproduce the same kind of racial disparities and harms that they hire folks like me to teach about, and how we can empower students to challenge those systems and those processes, and how to do that safely. So that's really been my work since I graduated. And now I'm writing a book about Black women. It's like the dream book of my life. So for me, that's, you know, I always see myself as a political educator. I feel like, you know, that's kind of my lane, and I'm totally fine with living in my lane. So this is to me an extension of that work, which is giving credit where credit is due and citing Black women who have already given us the lessons that we need for moments like these and are often not cited and often overlooked. So.
Jen, I want to say congratulations on your book. That is phenomenal. I'm so inspired and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. So again, congratulations on that. That's so amazing. And you all are just doing such excellent and important, I mean, important is an understatement, but important work. And I just want to thank you all again for being here. I'm so happy to be sharing this space with you and super excited to continue this conversation. So I guess let's just go ahead and kick it off. I want to kick it off by starting with a question about engaging with electoral politics. So as I mentioned earlier, this conversation should be much larger than a question of should we vote or not, right? But we must discuss the importance of engaging with electoral politics. So why should people invest their time in electoral politics? And what are some of the realistic expectations that we should have? In other words, what are the bounds of electoral politics, and for what reasons should we even be concerned with it? And Francella, since you have direct experience in this sphere, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think it's a really valid question, and a really important one. And I would say, my journey through answering this question myself has changed over time, personally, thinking about what role I want to play, thinking about how the system wasn't created with me or for me, right? I've also seen over time, though, and I worked in DC as a lobbyist for a lot of the causes and issues that I really care about and that we care about. Lobbyists have such a negative stereotype in terms of the terminology, because you think about an oil person, but like I lobbied for immigration reform. You lobby for the Violence Against Women Act. You need somebody on either side. You don't just want people on one side. You definitely want people on the other side. And all it just means is you have to register. So thinking about that, I've seen myself over the years, and we saw in 2018, the wave of younger people of color, more diversity in so many ways come in. I've seen myself, watch people come from a city and a state level to the federal level, or even, just community organizers that we've seen over and over, come in and run, so many great organizations supporting young people to run for, board, state school board, city council, sort of the more direct interfacing positions that we see in all of our communities. And I would say it just starts there, instead of thinking about it as like, the president and senators, like, which is this behemoth that you're going to get frustrated about. Electoral politics includes the local city, ANC commissioner that we had in DC, folks like that who really are deciding things that impact, your front door. And so I think that for me, it was very clear at a young age, that these people actually, I wasn't documented when we first came to this country. I was born in Costa Rica and we came here when I was young. And it was very clear to me the way that was very much impacted in my life. Whoever was actually making these decisions on immigration was like a direct impact on how safe I felt being, near a police officer, like it was just so direct that I've always known that. And so I would stress that, for people to think about how, it's local. It's local first, and that the bounds, of electoral politics, and how we can, really get sort of frustrated a lot of times with what's happening at a federal and a national level, and all of that is very real. And I wouldn't, I wouldn't chastise anyone for thinking like if there's no point, or it's not. It was designed not to work, or it's working exactly as it was designed, all of those things. Like I get that, but in the end, I think we're seeing a wave in the last couple of years. And I think that's exciting, and I hope it continues.
Can I add to that response? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. You can add and then answer however you want.
Yeah, so I'm really glad, Francella, that you said that, because I was looking at my notes and that's pretty much exactly what I wrote down, right? Is that the fact that when we think about voting, folks often focus on the presidential election, but they don't focus on local elections and how influential that is in folks' actual lives, right? And the other part that's important to think about with local elections is this is where we often see efforts towards greater substantive representation, right? So we typically see opportunities for more women and other non-cisgender, not a heterosexual, non-male folks to actually win in local elections. And often when they win those local elections, that gives them an opportunity to seed their position into larger positions of power down the line. And so when folks don't really pay attention to the local elections, it also sometimes can come back to affect us later on, right? It has political consequences for voters as well. And the other thing about local elections that I just want to say before I stop rambling, because I am a professor and I know I talk too much about electoral politics, as someone who understands why folks would abstain at times as well, and why folks feel complicated about it. But what I also want to say about local elections is when we think about the lives of those who are most vulnerable, we think about working class poor folk, when we think about folks who have been previously incarcerated, when we think about young Black, brown, undocumented folks. The legislation, laws, and bureaucracy that those folks come into contact with are most often linked to local political ordinances and authorities. And so when we think about the opportunity that we have to actually change lives and to make a difference in the ways that vulnerable people navigate the world, local politics gives us a lot of chances to do that. So I will always advocate for being very active locally, whether that's through voting or organizing or however you show up locally, but being present locally is critically important.
Plus one to what both Jen and Francella have already said. And from my standpoint as like a digital organizer, I see electoral politics as like an entry point for people's politicization, because like it's something that we talk about in school. It's more easily understood. Like there are a lot of representations of electoral politics and maybe less so of like community organizing. So I see it kind of as like a pipeline, right? And a lot of our members come to us because they want to take action around civic engagement, whether that's like, you know, stopping the state of Georgia from like purging the voter rolls or like demanding that we fund vote by mail. And like once people like begin that kind of journey, they're more able to like kind of turn their attention to like other issues that like, of course, electoral politics touch, but also do not like actively protect us from harm. And one other thing that I'll add is, right, like the folks on this call, historically, our ancestors did not have the right to vote in this country. And a lot of our ancestors, maybe people who are not directly related to us, right, organized for the right to vote because they saw the tactic as getting the right to vote, and then the strategy was building long-term power. And, you know, getting our feet in the door with electoral politics is not the same as rubber stamping, like, I believe in this system, but it's like using every tool in our toolbox to change what's going on. Because again, as Francella said, like it was never meant to include us. It's working exactly as it's designed. So yeah, I just want to share that.
Laura, I love how you say this idea of electoral politics as an entry point. I know in the organizing, radical organizing spaces I'm in, folks kind of have like two clear understandings. Either like they're just like, the whole system is wrong, it's damaged, it will never save us, there's no point in engaging. Actually engaging will legitimize a broken system. So that's one track of thinking. And the other track is, oh my goodness, we have to engage. This is the most important election of our lifetimes. If we don't do anything now, we might not have a place to do anything tomorrow. So I think thinking of electoral politics, not in this dichotomy, but really just as this tool and this entry point, I think is critical. My question for you all now is, what do we do with electoral politics in the midst of all of these multiple crises happening simultaneously? So what is the function? How do we enter into electoral politics in the midst of global health pandemic, in the midst of anti-Blackness running rampant, and in the midst of the largest economic crisis that many of us has experienced in our lifetimes? How will these crises shape public opinion? How will it shape voter turnout? And how will it permanently shape electoral politics moving forward?
So I want to echo again what Laura's saying also about voting being a tool among many, right? And I think that the first answer to this question is the way we engage with electoral politics in this moment is in that very way, seeing it as a tool among many, right? But I also think that the idea of permanence is really dangerous. I don't think that we have the privilege of permanence. When we talk about public opinion, as someone who is a political scientist, our memory is so short. It's disastrously short. And unfortunately, I don't think that a lot of what we are experiencing will have enough of an actual imprint on folks' permanent memory. And I wish I didn't have such a nihilistic idea. I wish I wasn't so cynical about that. But what I do think is this. What I do think is that we've seen Pew Research statistics, we've seen GenForward statistics, we've seen news story after news story that has indicated that this particular political moment and the conflicts of so many events happening simultaneously has been triggering for folks and politicizing them in ways that other moments have not. And that is something that for me makes me hopeful about how we move forward and how we think about something like public opinion and electoral politics and how people engage in the political process. It makes me hopeful that, you know, what we saw with the huge influx of folks who were like, yes, Black Lives Matter in June, and then come August, it's like, okay, well, we're not on that no more, right? I'm hoping that after this, we can stop seeing those types of trending behaviors when it comes to issues that are facing folks' actual lives. But I am that person who is not confident. I am that person who is not putting all my eggs in that basket. I am constantly critical. I am constantly cynical, and I am so committed to Black lives that I don't think I have the privilege to think that anything will, because what we're asking really is about white supremacy. So I don't think anything will really help us in 6 to 10 months with that. I think we have a whole lot of work left to do.
Yes. And I'm also thinking a lot about, you know, what are these formative changes we're seeing? That's one way to think about it, I guess. And the voter suppression and the disinformation that has, you know, run rampant. We've always had suppression. I think the disinformation as a tool and the scale, you know, by which the internet allows us to do it, that's newer. And I think it is having a long-term effect on the electorate, on young people, and how we process information and the people that we trust, the sources that we trust, questioning and doubting, you know, is become like a norm and a necessity, you know, because they have been so successful at manipulating the truth, you know, in so many ways. And so I think about that a lot, and especially because we monitor this for the Latinx community and in the Spanish language too. And one of their favorite, as you guys know, one of their favorite tactics is racial tension and pitting Black and brown people against each other. We see it a lot, you know, and I think about, you know, the Latinx community and our own internalized racism and issues that we have within the community and colorism within the community as well, and the way that they sort of stoke that, you know, is something that, you know, it's sometimes I'm not impressed with them. I'm almost like, are we that obvious, you know, that Russians are able to understand that Latinos are racist against themselves and mobile, like how did they, we're that obvious, huh? You know, like they're able to jump in and do that kind of suppression, you know. So I think about that a lot. I don't have an answer, right? But I do think that this is something that we're going to be contending with for a long time in terms of how the electorate really understands information and the truth.
Hopefully this is not a naive hope. I know I just said hope twice, but I really, I've been reflecting on like, okay, we're in COVID, right? We can't gather physically, really. We're having like so much political instability. Shit is going down. And yet I still feel like there are some positive things happening in this moment. One is that thinking about how we're even convening these spaces, right? Like where we're having these conversations right now. This is only possible because our like disabled comrades basically have been pushing for accessibility for so long. And the only reason why we really were like, vote by mail was a concept that people understood was because those folks have been demanding that we make voting accessible. And so that's something that I'm hopeful about, that these common sense ideas of like, having ASL interpreters and captioners and being able to vote by mail and teleworking and things like that. I know that those don't feel, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are like positive things that have come out of this moment because we're learning to organize in like what is a really chaotic time, and we're learning new skills. And for folks who are tuning in right now, if you'd like to learn more about disability justice, or I would really recommend following Alice Wong and Mia Mingus. I am by no means an expert on this, and I just want to like give shine to folks who are actually doing this work.
Thank you so much, Laura. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really hadn't thought about it that way. I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, that was excellent. And you had a portion in your answer when you briefly mentioned voting by mail. And among the crises that Jonathan mentioned is the distress that the United States Postal Service is currently dealing with, right? So it just so happens that a time where mail-in ballots will be used probably more than ever, the Postal Service is nearly crumbling. I believe it was said that nearly 40% of the voting population plans to use mail-in ballots this year. So, I mean, it's obviously imperative that every vote that's cast is counted. So in the midst of this dilemma that the USPS is facing, what can we do? And what have you seen folks doing to combat the role that this distress is playing in voter suppression? And also, how do we grapple with this supposed coincidence of this distress happening at a time when we sort of need this service the most?
Can I start here? Because we actually have some data about this that just came back. We started looking into what are the fears and concerns that the Latinx electorate has and their understanding of fraud and, the contested election and that kind of thing. So on this note, I feel pretty positive. So first of all, I was just looking today, it looks like 26 million people have already voted in this election. Wowza. And I think I saw something like it was 9 million or something last time around this time. Like it's just like, multiples. Lots of young people and first-time voters within that number as well. It's just huge. So I really love that. So when we were asking this recently in our survey, what your voting plans are, all of the suppression has made it so that, especially the closer we get to the election, the more people are planning to vote in person. So earlier, when we asked this question, more vote by mail. Now it's like, I'm voting in person. Personally, I'm voting in person. I'm gonna go early vote in LA. We have lots of places we can do it, even at Dodger Stadium, which is like 5 minutes away. And I want to go vote and have it be counted right away and not have to track it later, but not everybody has, the progressive haven of California of access to voting here. So I think when we had to ask this question, we saw that a lot of people, were planning to vote for sure. So actually motivation is actually really high, which is amazing. Like people are like sure they're going to vote. In the states that we poll, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada, Florida, Arizona, and we do bilingual polling of the Latinx electorate. But tons of fears about fraud. In fact, a real sense of just kind of assuming there was going to be fraud. It's like people are really very worried about that. They're still going to vote, but they're very much worried about it. But we tested some things like what would make you feel more confident, what would help in making you feel safe to vote in person, or to feel safe that the election is being conducted, with integrity. And there were a number of things, the number one that people really, really appreciated, in fact, increased people's confidence by 56%, was that they can actually track their ballot. And many, many states do provide this option. And I don't think everybody knows that, and I think if our groups could do a lot of a little bit more education, to help people understand that that's a service that the Secretary of State is going to provide you, it'll really help people feel better, about voting more mail, and really helping them do that. There were also a number of things like, by as much as 60 to 65%, people felt better to know that the workers are going to have masks, that people are going to be you can't require them to wear a mask, but very much encouraged to wear masks and have masks available, and have things be cleaned and 6 feet apart and that kind of thing. Once you told them a little bit more about those protocols, confidence in voting went up, and motivation went up like 64%. People felt safer to do it. So my headline from this data really is that, one, it's actually a lot of motivation across states. It's really people are sure they're going to do this. And that secondly, there are some things we can do and say to help people feel better about their fears, because their fears are very real. We have lots of fears and lack of confidence in the process, and worries that there might be a candidate that doesn't accept the results.
Jen, I see some facial expressions over there. You want to?
I'm like looking at Laura, but I realize we're not in person, so like she has no idea that I'm looking at her. I feel very complicated about these kinds of questions because I'm very just anti generally. Like I just have, my politics are just outside of these institutions and outside of electoral politics in such a way that my feelings about engaging with this are complicated. So I'm really happy that Francella gave that information and was able to kind of articulate all of that. I've been following with organizers and activists on social media who've been sharing tactics for ensuring that your ballots are counted and ways to get to your polling place and ensure that you're like in the right place at the right time, all of this. And I'm really excited about the activism I've seen and the organizing that I've seen. I think for me, and this goes into some of the other questions I think we'll talk about later, right, is about, which Marcella just brought up, what happens after the election, what happens, if there's contestation about who is going to be in the White House even after votes are counted, right? Like thinking statistically about the trend that we've seen in terms of fraud, the statistical possibility of a voter fraud issue affecting our election is just so small that I'm less concerned about that than I am about the current person that we are dealing with. And so for me, most of my trepidation comes into thinking about this administration and the type of violence that they continue to enact on folks, irregardless of the forms of justice, checks and balances, and infrastructure we have in place to protect folks. So that's where my focus has been primarily.
I can add a data point, at least for the Latinx community. Latinos, 69% were concerned that either candidate won't accept the results if they lose. But 45% said they will be willing to take action if one candidate does not accept the results. And I know we want to get there too in this conversation, but like, what can we do?
My response is that this is not a coincidence. This is planned and premeditated, not voter fraud, but fraud committed by the Republicans. Like in California, we're seeing like ballot boxes like going up in flames and then fake ballot boxes being planted and people like putting them in there. And the California Republican Party has admitted to this and they're not stopping. So I think we just need to call it as it is, and we need to be ready for a coup and then to call it a coup. We're gonna get there though, so we can move on.
Oh, Jonathan, do
I
you have
think
something?
that might be the best quote of the day. Just call it a coup. When we get there, just be prepared to call it a coup. Go on,
Facts.
Terry.
Yeah, Jen, I'm glad that you brought up this point about your politics being outside of these institutions. You know, it's the same for myself and for many, many other folks. And we have some questions about this later. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts about that then for sure. But first, during our webinars, we always set aside some time to look at some data and talk about how it might inform our movement work. So let's do that now. It should go pretty quickly. We'll take a little look and then we'll dive into a few more questions. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. Let's see here. All right, can everybody see that? Cool, cool. All right. So we went over this in the beginning, but just as a quick recap, what is GenForward? So GenForward is a bi-monthly survey of 18 to 36-year-olds that gives us a look at some real facts about how young adults or about young adults' political preferences and behaviors. It's a nationally representative sample of over 3,250 respondents, and it's also able to be disaggregated by race, ethnicity, gender, income, and region. So let's take a look. These next 2 slides will show us if and how people are voting in the 2020 national election. So here we have a breakdown by race showing us if folks intend to vote. The question is, will they vote in 2020? So we want to look at the red bar here. So we see across all of, we see across all of the groups, a majority support, we see across all of the group that people intend to vote. And only a small number indicated that they will definitely not vote. So according to this, only a small portion said they definitely will not vote. But we also see a decent number of probable or likely voters across the board. So who are people voting for? In this survey, the overall majority of respondents indicated that they will cast a vote for Biden. But broken down by race, we see majority support for Biden in all groups except for white respondents. So we've got 63% of Black respondents, 66% of Asian American respondents, 53% of Latinx respondents, and 43% of white respondents indicating that they'll vote for Biden. So note that within these groups, only among white respondents was voting for Trump a close second. In fact, Black respondents are actually more likely to not vote at all than they are to vote for Trump. So this next slide, let's talk about why folks are voting the way that they are. This question asks respondents, if you are voting for Trump, are you doing so because you're enthusiastic about him? So when discussing electoral politics in our 2-party system, I feel like we often hear the critique that voters are forced to choose the lesser of 2 evils, right? But I find this to be interesting here. Across all racial groups in this survey, those who are voting for Trump are doing so because they are enthusiastic about him, not simply because they dislike the other candidate, but because they have genuine support and enthusiasm for Trump. But when asked the same question about Biden, we actually see the opposite. Those who are voting for Biden said that they're doing so not out of enthusiasm, but because they dislike the other candidate. Though among Black respondents, we actually see a pretty close split. 49% of Black respondents say that they'll vote for Biden out of enthusiasm, and 51% are voting out of dislike for the other candidate. So here's the last slide. We've shown this in previous webinars, but it's still relevant, and I think it's just so powerful. So here, respondents were asked what they believe is the best way to make racial progress, and they were given the opportunity to provide their top 3 choices. So if we take a look, since this is a discussion about the election, let's start with voting. Asian American respondents believe that voting is the best way to make racial progress. Latinx and white respondents believe that voting is the second best way. And the number 1 choice for Latinx and white respondents is the same, which is nonviolent protests and demonstrations. Now, Black respondents did not name voting as any of the top 3 best ways to make racial progress. And let's be real, we know that voting is not a radical liberating tool, right? As you've all mentioned during this time. But the thing that we always highlight with this slide is that when asked this question, Black respondents named revolution as the best way to make racial progress. And then let's just kind of top that off with noting that a number of white respondents actually indicated that racial progress is not even needed. So before I move to the panelists, I just want to remind the viewers really quickly to send their questions in here or wherever you're watching this using the chat function. But back to the panelists, what do we make of the fact that Black respondents named revolution as the best way to make racial progress, yet some white respondents said that racial progress is not needed at all? And what do you think about these individual answers? And also maybe what do you think about them together?
Can I start?
Go.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk about my own work, which, you know, I think it will help with this is, you know, I did interviews with young Black folks in 2018, 50 young Black folks in Chicago, and I asked them about the kind of threats they face in their everyday lives. When I asked them about voting and political participation, I asked them about informal participation and formal participation. And when I asked them about voting, they essentially said to me, like, we've been doing that and look where we are. And they said, we are tired. We are tired. And so repeatedly, this happened in 50 interviews where I'm talking to people and they are saying almost the exact same thing. And their response was, the whole system is guilty, right? The whole system is guilty. And so when you have folks who have watched their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents voting and doing things that historically have been seen as respectable, right? Respectable forms of political participation. And they see where things are, they often say, well, that has not worked. And so there must be another way. And so I'm not saying, again, I don't want people to accuse me of saying that I'm not my ancestor, because I absolutely am my ancestors, and my ancestors was thugs, right? But what I'm saying is that when we think about formal legislative processes, when we think about the tactics of the NAACP that have been primarily through the judiciary, when we think about the ways that institutions have been put pressure on institutions to make codified change, and that change may happen in a constitutional amendment, it may happen as a piece of legislation, but when you get into the community and on the ground, the actual lived experiences of Black folks, they don't feel very good. They don't feel safe. People don't feel cared for. They don't have what they need. They don't have the resources to survive and thrive. And so that, to me, is not surprising. The data that you are showing is not surprising that young Black folks are saying that revolution is the only answer, because when you've done all the other things, when you've participated in all the other ways, and you still don't see the fruits of your labor, you will say, okay, there must be something else. Now, when we think about, you compared it to the white folk, and so I'm like, oh, Terry's over here started stuff. Okay, so we could have compared. We didn't have to do that, but let's do that then. So we go ahead and talk about white supremacy, right? We know that there's data out there that suggests that for white folks, even young white folks who people think are somehow more progressive than their grandparents or whatever, they are highly segregated people. They live in communities where like 9 out of 10 of their friends are white and come from the same backgrounds and upbringing as themselves. Oftentimes, they do not have the desire nor the access to the lived experiences of folks who do not look like them. And so when you think about the question about whether or not we even need racial justice, you know, I mean, right? And so what I'm saying is that, you know, certain of us are experts on that question because we live that life every single day. And so it's really important to ask the folks who are the most affected and the most vulnerable about whether or not we need to have racial justice, because we actually would know better than the folks who can find themselves insulated or changing the channel so they don't have to deal with anything having to do with race at all. So I'm stopped now. Y'all have fun.
100, yes. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to add something totally different, but I know we're almost out of time, so I want to just make sure I say it too. two things about the Latinx community that come out a little bit in your numbers. One is you have to ask gender. Latina women and men, like a 40 to 50 point delta on Trump support versus Biden support. Latina women have been fleeing the GOP over the decades. And so when people ask us for our help, we say, listen, you can spend some time trying to convince Latino men, do that thing, machismo was real, or you can get out these Latina women who actually are also staying home because you don't talk to them, you know, and because they also lack a little bit of confidence. Latina voter turnout is actually lower than white women and Black and non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic Black women. So we need to, you know, make sure that Latinas understand that their voice is needed, you know. That's one. And then two that I wanted to add is we did do a project recently with Ian Haney Lopez, who wrote a book about dog whistle politics, about race in the Latino community. And if you ask Latinx people how they identify, only about 25 to 30% actually identify as people of color. They actually don't. It's really like us, people in my circle, in my world, will identify as people of color. 25 to 30% actually identify as white ethnics, and another 25 to 30 is a group called bootstrappers, which is, you know, we are a pretty mixed group, and so there's a group that kind of marries both. But the idea that you've got 20 to 30% that consider themselves people of color and 25 to 30 that are consider themselves white ethnics, you know, really changes then how you message and talk, how you mobilize, what connects them, what, you know, all of that. And so it's incredibly complicated. And it's real, you know, we have to talk about it and name it so that we can address the things that unite us, because there are many that do. And my 10-month-old literally just, she just crawl through the door? Where's her dad? So I have to go, I think. Or you guys can see her. Hold on one second.
Babies matter.
Bring on the baby.
Let me bring her up here. She really came in here. Oh my.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
I'll respond briefly. I too am not surprised by these answers. I think the takeaway is that a lot of white people are probably racist, and that's why racial progress is not needed. And then around Asian Americans, I think we have to reflect on the fact that a lot of us have immigrated, or our families have immigrated or fled regimes that were very violent, where participation that is beyond voting was horribly repressed and suppressed. And that is probably why a lot of folks are let's go through the system first, because there is that lingering trauma of what happens when you speak out against the state, which is again why I say that electoral politics is the pipeline where we kind of begin people's politicization and kind of also give them the confidence that it is, you have rights. I mean, right now they are being contested, as we can see, but we do have to support people to go through that journey. And a lot of folks are, a lot of Asian Americans have recently immigrated after 1965 because of the Immigration and Nationality Act, right? So a lot of us are kind of doing things as second or third generation.
So there's two slides that I want to bring us back to that Terry covered. We saw that those who are voting for Trump are doing so overwhelmingly because they're enthusiastic about him. Yet those who are voting for Biden are doing so not because they're enthusiastic for Biden, but because they actually don't like the other candidate. Should Democrats be worried? Is this backwards? What do you all think of this?
Okay. I'm gonna be nice. No, I think the answer here, I mean, if you were a part of a club full of people who hated other people who looked different from you, and you thought that you were supposed to inherit the earth, and you got to vote for a leader who thought the same thing and got to run the whole planet, wouldn't you be enthusiastic about that too? I mean, if you were a KKK member and a KKK leader ran for president and had a chance of running, you'd be like, oh, I'm so excited. I get to vote for him. Okay. And the truth is that you don't have to be white to endorse and participate in white supremacy. You don't have to be non-Black to be anti-Black. And so those numbers, to me, while it's hard to look at them and I'm not enjoying it, but this is the same week where we're seeing folks like 50 Cent and Ice Cube coming out the side of their neck talking about Trump. This is why I'm watching The Twilight Zone, because we are living in the Twilight Zone. And so this is not surprising. Yeah, people are very excited to vote for a world-renowned white supremacist who thinks he's impervious to a virus he just had, right? You just had it, bro. You're not immune. You can't be immune to something you just had, right? And the reason why people are feeling a way about voting for Biden is because people actually are challenging the Democrats to actually do better. I'm cool with that. That does not stress me out at all, right? Like, and this leads into one of the future questions we're going to have about accountability, right? Like, it's okay to vote someone unenthusiastically. We don't have to be enthusiastic when we make a decision between folks who are going to represent us, because we can push them to represent us in ways that are substantive and not just symbolic or descriptive. And so I think the idea of enthusiasm often creates a veil over the fact that we are supposed to contest politics. We're not supposed to just walk into politics and be like, everything's fine here, vote for that guy, I'm having a great day, let's go get a beer. That's not how this is supposed to work. And so for me, seeing that people are feeling a way about voting for Biden, but they still plan to vote for him, that is the type of way, that's the type of carrying on we should want. We should want folks to engage in politics in such a way that they are critical when they cast their vote.
Plus 1,000. And I feel like, I know that a lot of Trump voters are bought into like self-glorification, and they're not adept at separating like what is misinformation, what is disinformation, what is reality. And they support like Trump's reifying of conspiracy theories. They are not able to separate them. Either that's because they're ignorant or it's willful. Whereas folks who are choosing to vote for Joe Biden know this is about harm reduction and changing the material conditions that we're organizing under. And something that I think about a lot, like as we're moving towards Election Day, is that James Baldwin wrote this essay, Notes on the House of Bondage, which came out November 1st, 1980, which is like an election year. And he described his vote as a coldly calculated risk, and it was a means to buy time to ensure that the machinery was made to pause. And, that's what we're doing today, right? Like, we are also, voting for Joe Biden. And let me say this in a hypothetical, not as a person who works for a 501c3. But voting for Joe Biden is not like an endorsement of the current system, right? Like, we should, as Jen said, like criticize what's happening. And I think that oftentimes, I think about like how the narrative is framed and how conservatives are often the ones who get to say things like freedom and patriotism. And it is also patriotic to criticize your country, because if you truly love something, you want to make it better, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you so much. And that's a perfect transition into this next portion. So let's talk about organizing and radical futures. And in other words, let's talk about what people can do outside of voting. So our last panel discussion was about direct action, and we knew this, but our panelists made very clear the need for direct confrontation with the state, right? And sort of extra systemic methods of political action, especially in a time like this. So what do you all, as activists, as organizers, think that folks need to be doing to prepare for the election? And also, what can and should folks be doing in order to be more fully politically active, both now and after Election Day?
Okay, I will go first. There is so much that you can do, and I know that can be very overwhelming. So I would recommend actually checking out this resource called Mapping Our Roles in a Social Change Ecosystem. It's by Deepa Iyer. She is a mentor of mine. And she basically goes through this like mapping exercise where you can figure out like what role or roles you can play, because it's not reasonable or accessible to expect that everyone's going to be out on the streets, right, come election day, or for any action really. But maybe through this resource you can figure out if you're a communicator, or maybe you're a graphic design artist, and you figure out what you can actually offer and how you can make the most impact. That's the most important. And then I think, again, we need to be prepared for chaos and a possible coup. In the 3 scenarios that I anticipate happening, like there could be chaos in all of them. And one other resource that I would recommend checking out is called the Hold the Line Guide. It's a bunch of organizers and also like political education folks, or who put together this guide to basically map out, like, as a civilian, like what are the things that you can do, and like how can you work together with your community to like create a safety plan and decide like how you're going to hold the line. And the last thing that I'll say is lean into your own knowledge. Again, like many of us are descended from folks who have experienced coups, state violence, state terror, either here or in their motherlands, our motherlands. So there's a lot of knowledge that can be accessed by learning your own history. So like talk to your families. There's a reason why your family is probably really traumatized and fucked up and has intergenerational trauma. Maybe this is why. Talk to them.
So I second all of that. I think that's amazing, especially the resource on trying to figure out where you fit in. I think that's critically important. Everyone doesn't need to hold the megaphone. It's not everyone's role, I assure you. But I want to also provide some scaffolding to that, to say, like, local politics, again, are super important. And, you know, we've seen a lot of phenomena where a major catastrophe will happen and folks will leave their local areas and, oh, the baby's here. They'll leave their homes and they'll go to these parts of the country that they've never been in before, they've never organized in before, they don't have connections. And it ends up putting a strain sometimes on local organizers who are trying to respond to the issues facing that community. And so what I would say is, like, figure out the ways that you can really focus on what is happening at home, what is happening locally, and then also be thinking about ways where you don't have to be a physical body in these remote locations, but you can figure out how to support folks in the ways that they actually need support and have articulated the needs that they have, right? So frequently, I use the example of the Chicago Community Bond Fund. They're very good, for instance, about articulating when they have enough funds to bail out young folks who are doing work in Chicago, and they will actually say, okay, now we need you to focus on the bond funds in New Orleans, focus on the bond funds in Minnesota, right? Like, they will push you to these other locations to say, like, thank you so much for your support, but we also want to make sure that the money and the support you're giving is going to the right places. And so I really want people to not only figure out where they fit in these larger movements and organizations, but also think about the ways that these decisions we make at home and the ways we insert ourselves in other parts of the country, in other cities, in other districts, in other counties, that has a real impact on folks' lives. And so if folks can really be intentional about the ways that they organize, and about the ways that they inject themselves, and the type of labor sometimes that they extract from organizers, that stuff is really critically important.
Totally agree that we're gonna have to lean on the organizers more than ever before in the next month or so. Like, it's time. Whatever organizing 101, 102, 103 skills you have, it's gonna definitely be all hands on deck. My question to you all, and let's just get at the thing. If Trump loses, do you believe he's actually gonna step down? One. And two, you know, Jen, you've really been hitting us with, you know, white supremacy 101. They out here, they're enthusiastic about being out here. I think we had one statistic like 9 out of 10 white folks are just around other white folks. So, first question: what happens if and when Trump loses that he doesn't step down? That's part one. Part two is this even larger fear about the possibility of a looming civil war. It seems like we are closer, more than the last 100 years, to civil war than ever before. Only this time there's not really a clear north and south. It's like pockets of people all around the place. So it's like, just can you trust your neighbor? So let's just get at just the real deal. If Trump don't step down, what do we do? And do you all feel that there's a possibility of a looming civil war? Seriously, I wish this could be like light, but this is actually serious. And what do we do about it?
So I kind of want to defer to Laura, because Laura, you said that you already had 3 possible scenarios, and I would like to hear all 3 of them if you would like to share.
This is not original work. This is, I think, widely held by lots of folks, but basically there'll be chaos in every possible scenario, most likely. One, it's unconclusive and there is just chaos until we figure out what happens. 2, Trump wins. It is not clear if the election was swung for him, and so there is chaos. Oh, maybe there's 4. Okay, 3, Biden wins. Trump contests it, refuses to step down, and then 4. Wait, what was the last one? Yeah, I mean, I think those are the gist, right? That is the gist, and the idea is that to prevent a coup, which is very possible, knowing like everything that is happening right now between voter suppression, in Texas, they're only allowing like one voting center per county. A lot of things like this are happening. We have to be prepared to demand, like, we cannot call the results until every single ballot is counted. And we have to be prepared to take to the streets, whether that's physically or digitally, and to apply like every pressure to make sure that they do that. And I believe in the Hold the Line guide, they also recommend like nonviolent protest because it will escalate very quickly. I know that the military leaders have been in conversation with I think like third-party lawyers to figure out like what their role is in like ensuring, or like what their role is if they're called upon like a transition or like keeping the peace, while this is happening. And so all these mechanisms are already in place, and that like our role as like the people whose government should be accountable to need to hold the line in being like, we demand that you count all the votes. We do not accept anything less than that. And make a plan. Jen, what do you think?
So this is honestly not something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, because I've spent the last 6 months in existential dread, and so I didn't want to add another scenario to my imaginings. But I think what I will say is that Trump is a white supremacist, and I don't put anything past this person. I don't doubt that there will be chaos. I don't doubt that if/when, or however we want to frame it, he loses, he will contest the outcome. And I don't doubt that his followers, who are white supremacists, will have a violent reaction. So I think for me, the question about what do we do is a very complicated question, right? Because the question then becomes to me, how do we survive that scenario? And for me, I'm like, well, we have to arm ourselves and we have to be prepared to be in the streets. That's all that I understand about this moment, is that we are at a stage where we are no longer speaking in theoreticals. We are no longer hypothesizing about a future. It is going to be here in just a few days. And we have to be serious about the fact that, we've seen so much horror over just the past 5 years, the past decade. We've seen peaceful protesters being shot in the street. We've seen peaceful protesters being driven down in Charlottesville. Like, we have seen so much violence and terror at the hands of white supremacists. So at this point, there's nothing left to be said here other than we have no choice but to protect ourselves and our families and ensure that we survive. So if y'all was looking for a professional assistant professor on the tenure track answer, you're not gonna get one from me, because I'm trying to find a gun. So.
You know what's wild is that if we were any other country, and like other countries would be like, we need to intervene and like place people to observe their election.
Right. But because it's us, and because we have literally fucked over everyone, right? Like we are literally the worst. And so what is happening, people are watching, right? Like they're watching this and they're saying, well, you made your bed, you laid in it. You have to lay in it. And unfortunately, a lot of us, the folks on this phone call, we didn't make this bed. We woke up and we was in this bed, right? And that's why we have to, like I said, listen, I grew up in Oakland. You arm yourself and you protect yours. That's all I got at this juncture.
That's where we are as a country. It is literally about surviving. And probably appropriate for 2020, since this whole year has pretty much been about our survival. So thank you, Laura and Jen, for your honesty, for your directness. We're not in a time where we really have the ability to sugarcoat anything at this moment. This is about the real, period. So Jen, thank you. Laura, I appreciate that. I do think that this is a moment for folks to take our scenario planning seriously. This is a moment to get with your people, get with your organizers, get with whoever your organizing family or biological family or chosen family is, and create a plan for what you're going to do on all of Laura's various scenarios, because this is real life that we're living in. Like we said, the election is on November 3rd. It will probably not be an election day. We'll most likely have an election month that we struggle through all together, if not more. So yeah, I just appreciate the honesty, the directness. I think that's what our Data for Liberation webinars are for. And that's what we have to keep moving towards. Terry?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both so much for that. And I think we lost Francella, but thank you to her as well. That was amazing and real and exactly what we needed. And Jonathan, I'm right there with you. Like, we need to get ready, and however that looks for you, do it. We got to get ready and stay ready. We have no idea what this looks like, but we definitely have to be prepared. And I feel like we've made that very clear in this discussion. People who are already in the streets have been making that clear, and we just gotta stay with our people. So as always,
we have one more question from the audience, Terry. I don't know if you
okay.
But I'm going to read this question to you all, and then we'll close on this note. It says, if the mobilization and engagement and attention to politics in this moment is driven by opposition to Trump, what do you think will happen if he does lose and we no longer have a clear personified villain in politics? Will folks feel like the fight has been won and they can check out again? If so, what can we do to avoid that? Very good question. Thank you. Any thoughts?
You wanna start, Laura?
Sure, I can go first.
Uh-huh.
I would hope not, because Trump, I think this has been reiterated for many months to years now, is not the problem. He's a symptom of the problem. He's a symptom of the system that is broken. And again, not speaking necessarily as someone repping a 501c3, we want more than just like survival, right? Like we want to be able to thrive, and the platform that we're being given by the Democrats is not that future. And there are already folks pushing them to more progressive values and holding them accountable to that. Like there was, Kamala was like, Joe Biden's not going to ban fracking. And it's like, no, but that's what we want. We want that, and again, I think that, yes, some of us maybe were younger and not as politicized during the Obama administration and before that, but a whole different generation of folks are growing up right now or being politicized right now. And I don't think that I just think that despite if Trump does not win and does not continue as president, there has been so much collective grief and trauma that has happened over these 4 years that cannot be easily forgotten. I would doubt that. And again, we have to turn to local politics as well. Like this election is not just about the presidency. There are a lot of other battles being fought right now, from the Senate, the House, the Supreme Court, all the way down the ticket. And we have to be vigilant.
Yes. So I really want to disabuse us of this idea first, that politics is about heroes and villains, and that we just show up every 4 years to pick a winner because one side is good and one side is bad, right? So I really want us to get away from that type of framing of electoral politics. We are in a winner take all, first past the post system, where we have two parties that fight for a median voter, and they do their best to get that median voter. And that means that inevitably we don't have extremely progressive representation in Congress. We don't have extremely progressive representation in the judiciary or in the executive branch. Those are just the facts. So we don't need a villain to understand that we have issues with access to healthcare. We don't need a villain to know that paid disequity is a problem. We don't need a villain to see in our communities. When I go home to Oakland and I look around at the places that were there when I was growing up and they are no longer there, when I see folks that are now houseless who were living in an apartment right on that same street and can't afford to live there anymore, I don't need a villain in the White House or running for any political office to show me what is happening in my lived experiences. So the second part of this answer is, when people say people to me, I always ask, which people? Because maybe white people will go, oh, Trump's out, we did our part, we're done. That's what they did when they saw that Barack Obama was elected too. They was like, oh, we ended racism, high five, Jim, right? But we know better, okay? We are not Karen, and we know better. And so what I will say is that people will not just move on because we don't have Trump as a villain. I think that white folk will frequently, yes, turn their eyes and avert their eyes from things that make them feel challenged and uncomfortable. But that does not mean that the rest of us have forgotten what we are living through every single day. So I want us to be more nuanced when we think about politics and when we think about who the people are and how we engage in the American political system.
Absolutely. That was a huge question. That was a very, very big question. And I think you both did a great job answering it. This is not new, right? And regardless of the election results, we have work to do, lots of work. So Jen, I just want to end by saying that I second your everything that you said, especially this having a nuanced view of politics. And like I was saying earlier, and like Jonathan said, like we all have said, we got to get ready and we got to stay ready. So again, thank you to both of you. Thank you for sharing this space with us. Thank you for chatting with us and offering us your expertise and your candor. Thank you to all who are watching, and thank you once again to Selena and Rory for providing ASL interpretation. If you didn't catch the whole conversation, or if you want to share this, it will be up on the GenForward YouTube page, so you can share it there. And if you want to keep up with us, please follow GenForward and Black Youth Project on social media. Stay tuned for information about our next webinar. Take care, everybody. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank y'all.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Phoebe.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
That was great.